Hello, my name is Malithe. I'm a Danish landscape photographer who travels around the world trying to capture the beauty of the different countries and the different nature around the world. I'm currently sharing most of my work through Instagram, and you can see I take pictures like this. So we have volcanoes and mountains and big green landscapes. So really what I'm trying to accomplish is the big epic look of landscape mixed with some magical feeling. Uh, Basically, what I'm trying to do with my photography is recreate how magical it was when I saw it myself, because it's so hard to really capture it on a camera. So I think what makes my photography special is that I do my editing in a way that tries to pull back that magical feeling you have in the moment. So that's what I'm going to be teaching you in these lessons. I'm going to be going through how I create my specific edit look and my philosophies behind what I do in Lightroom and what I do in Photoshop, and how we can have a workflow where everything, all the different steps work together to create one special photo. So really what we will have in these lessons are a lot of different techniques and a lot of different steps using both Lightroom and Photoshop, and we will have like this journey of editing one photo, which means that it's a lot of small things that in the end create this big unique photo, which also means that I will recommend that you watch all the first 10 episodes for sure in that order to get the most out of this. But of course, if you're interested in just getting that one technique or learning this one specific thing, you can also watch each episode individually. So let's stop talking about it and let's start editing some photos. First thing, before we start editing, it's very important to get things right from the get-go. If we take a picture in here that's not optimized or not optimal, with the lighting or other settings, then all the hard work we do will seem futile. It will seem like it's just not working the way it does with a properly shot photo. So it might not be the most interesting part of the lessons, but it's definitely one of the most important ones to get right. So in this lesson, I'll go through a list of things you need to make sure are optimized and ready before we even start editing. The first thing is to always shoot your photos in RAW format. It's different for the different brands of cameras, but generally you want to go to the menu, click on the file format, make sure it's not set to JPEG but to RAW. And if you can make it uncompressed, we are going to get even more data out of our picture. When we have our camera set to RAW, another thing is in Lightroom here we can see the settings of the photo. In general, you want to make sure you're shooting at your ISO, which is like the digitally enhanced light in the photo. We want the ISO to be as low as possible, because then you will get the least amount of noise in your photo. Actually, this photo is shot with a really high ISO that I would have shot differently today. You can see when you zoom in closely that there's a lot of noise, but this camera has done a pretty good job of not making the noise seem too obvious. So in general, try to shoot the ISO number here on your camera as close to 100 as possible, and the f aperture here, if we can have it as close to f8 as possible, we're going to get the sharpest photos for landscapes. Again, the reason why this photo is shot in 2.8 is because it's shot just before the sun actually rises, so the scenery is very dark, and in the end you don't want to compromise. Like, if you don't, it would have been optimal to have a tripod here and or even have the shutter here lower, because you can shoot close to 1/50th of a second with a decent stabilized camera, even lower sometimes, and still get a sharp image. So if I could have had the f a little higher, it might have been sharper. Most lenses are the sharpest at around f8. So try to aim for having an f around 8. But then again, we don't want to compromise with the different exposure and stuff. So don't be scared by having a low ISO or anything. In general, try to aim for having these things perfect, but don't be afraid to mix them up. They're not that important. So speaking of the exposure in your photo with these different settings, we will want to always aim for a underexposed photo instead of an overexposed photo. Of course, it's optimal just to get the exposure as perfect as possible, but in many cases when you're shooting a little towards the sun, you will get a very blown out sky, and either you have to choose to have a very bright sky or very dark foreground. As you can see here, my photo is still pretty dark, and that is not a problem because today with programs like Lightroom and Photoshop, we can bring back all this detail just by, for instance, going up with the shadow slider or up with the exposure slider. You can see up here in Lightroom we have something called a histogram. In here we can click this button, then it will show if something is clipping, and clipping means that we're losing data. So if we're clipping, we will get a blue color now. So if I do this, you can see here the black color is losing data because it's getting too dark. And in the same sense, we can do it with the highlights. Now I clicked it on for the highlights, that will show a red color. Here you can see it's clipping because we're losing data in our white colors. There's some colors and other pixels that are lost in this process, but because this was shot pretty underexposed, we can bring back all the details like this, and you can see up here in the top of the histogram with the white colors, we're not losing any data at all. And at the same time, we can bring back the shadows digitally. So right now we're not losing any data in our photo. We have all the data possible because we shot the photo underexposed and digitally restored it. It's way harder to restore an overexposed sky. If we tried that, it would look more like in this photo where we can already see something is clipping from the get-go. If we try to recover this, we're going to get some weird colors here. You can see how the blue is having a miscoloration here, and you can have a way worse example where you're just seeing a white circle even. So you want to rather underexpose than overexpose, but always restore it. And as the fourth thing, try to make sure you take your photos in good lighting. And what is good lighting? Well, soft light is way better than harsh light for this kind of editing, because in soft light, the light of the sun is directed with an angle and with not too much harshness onto the surface, which means we're not washing out any details, we're not overriding any details in the ground, and we can restore all the small colors and highlights, where if the sun is really strong, we might just see this very bright white color on all of the things, and we're not going to be able to move around as much. Again, I have this other photo as an example that was taken on midday. You can see if I take the shadow slider up and down here, I mean, we can see there's a little difference. The same with the exposure slider, but it's like we have one state which is bright and one which is dark, where this photo, which was taken in soft light, we can slowly take it up and down. We see how all the different things in the photos kind of react smoothly, and there's so much details to be found in the photo that we can restore. I'm just moving the settings around now to exemplify that. So always try to take your picture in soft lighting, and that is sunrise, sunset, and the time just after sunset, which is called blue hour, where it's very dark feeling, but you can still take photos with the last light, and also golden hour just before the sunset. And also if it's just a little cloudy, or you have something softboxing the sun somehow, if the sun goes through a glass or something like that, where the sun is getting softboxed, then this will also work as soft lighting. So just think about which quality does the light have right now. Does it fall vertically down, or is it split more dynamically over the surface. So as one more thing with the sun, we want to make sure that we're shooting at an angle towards the sun. And I'm not saying you have to shoot directly towards the sun, but you want to kind of shoot at an angle either 90 degrees, or you can shoot at a lot of angles, like to the side of the sun. In general, you just don't want to shoot in the line with the sun. So with the sun to your back, taking photos away, all the sunlight will be distributed flatly onto everything, and your image will look extremely flat. Just try to avoid that if you want to be able to pull around with the shadows and the exposure and get this magical smooth feeling. So if you want this magical smooth feeling, you need to make sure that the lighting is very soft and you're shooting at an angle towards the sun. So one last thing I will say is that it's very important that you always think about having a subject or a story to tell in the photo, because the way we're going to be editing the photo, we will want to edit and guide the light for the viewer to look at. If you don't have a subject or a story or something that the picture is trying to convey, then it's hard to actually direct the photo, because we want the light to kind of soothe through the photo. So if we have no subjects, then it's kind of hard to have a direction without editing, and it's going to be way harder to be creative and align all the small things into one direction. So make sure you already have a story that you just have to bring out there. The general idea is that you can make a good photo really good, you can make a decent photo okay, and you can make a bad photo decently with editing. So you can never take a photo shot really poorly and make it perfect. You need to try to get things right from the get-go. And that's it for this lesson. Maybe not the most interesting lesson in terms of editing, but definitely maybe the most important ones. If you don't have this perfected before you start editing, all the editing work we're going to do won't matter as much. You need to make sure you have these things right. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lesson.